So, our first assignment is the project management theory. This is the first assignment for me. You're doing an assignment for Tori as well. Don't forget about that. Obviously, you need to be doing any of the work that Tori sets you in addition to any of the work that I will also set you. I'll try and make it nice and obvious what you need to do. So, yeah, we talked about this last week. What do you remember? What is a project? How would you define what a project is? Well, actually, the first thing, just so that you know what we're aiming towards, we're going to create a set of resources that explain 2 ways to manage a project. And there's a number of different ways you can do that. You can do a presentation, you can do a flyer, you can do some fun online interactive video website or something if you want to do that. Or just a plain document, or any combination of these. 2 would be, if you can, the temptation I suppose is always to just do a document because it's easier. But if you can if you can do at least 2 of these, then that would be great. Get some variety in there. What they need to contain, if you've downloaded and had a look at the assignment brief, these are the criteria that we're going to be working towards in the next few sessions. These are the specific things that Edexcel wants you to demonstrate that you can do. So when you're writing your materials, if you could sort of aim to meet these points. They are listed in the assignment brief, they're on the second sheet, but these are the things that you need to be working towards. These are the things that your submission should demonstrate, that you can explain the principles and some of the procedures involved, and the importance of actually having a procedure that you follow rather than making it up as you go along. And then, yeah, we're going to look at different system lifecycle models in detail. We touched on a few briefly last week. Remember what they were? Can you name some of the project management models that we looked at? Prince2, good, is one of them. ITIL was another. Say again? Yeah, the software development lifecycle, SDLC. Good, yeah, there's many acronyms. PRINCE stands for Projects in Controlled Environments. Do you remember what ITIL stands for? Yes? Good guess. Infrastructure library. You'll learn plenty more about that later on. And there were other development lifecycle models that we looked at. Excellent. So these are the criteria that we're aiming towards. So when you take notes, when we're sort of discussing these things, if you hear something that's related to one of these, please note it down. Please write it down because that's the whole aim of what we're doing. So what is a project? Some of the principles will probably be in here. If you're going to start discussing the principles, then it's good to define what a project is. So do you remember what I don't know if you took notes or if you remember from last week, what is a project? Yeah, so it has a definite start and a definite end. So it's sort of time bound. It's also, therefore, temporary. It doesn't last forever. It has a definite start and a definite end. What else is a project? What makes it a project? Why is it not just a procedure or something that you do? Yes, set of objectives. Resources come into it, yes, definitely. You need to be able to manage your resources in order to achieve the project's aims and objectives. Yes, it's usually a team of people, often with very different skills. It's not just a team of people that have the same skill. It's usually bringing in different expertise from different disciplines, contractors and whatnot. We'll talk more about those a bit later today. What else is a project? Why is it a project? Why is it not just something that you do? It's unique. Yes, thanks, Tom. It's unique. A project is unique. If it's something that you did yesterday or last week, then it's just a process that you have to go through. It's just any other process. Good. I think that's most of them. Oh, and change. Yeah, so there's going to be some objectives which change something. It's temporary, as you said, and includes a variety of jobs, different people with different skills, different disciplines, and it's unique. It's also uncertain. There's an element of uncertainty to it. Because it's unique, because it hasn't necessarily been done before, inevitably there's going to be some things that happen. There's going to be some things you didn't expect. that are going to crop up during the project, and you need to be able to deal with them. Good. So with that in mind, if that's what a project is, why do we need to use a formal project methodology? Why don't we just sort of make it up as we go along and sort of dive in and start changing stuff? You do need to plan and prepare. Good. You need to adequately plan and prepare your system. Why? What would happen if you didn't? No, there'd be no structure to it. Yeah, there would be errors. There'd be mistakes would be made. Yes, it helps you manage a team of people. If everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing, then yeah, then it's much easier to achieve your objective. Um, Otherwise, you have people standing around and then quite nice to do. Much more efficient. So plan and prepare, and it forces you to think things through. If you think, okay, we need to do this first, well then what do we do? What does that lead to? What do we do next? It forces you to think about the details. It forces you to think about the things that you're going to change. Yeah, also ensure it's worthwhile. It might be that by the time you get to the end, you've achieved your objectives, but your objectives weren't worth achieving in the first place, or it's cost you far more than it's worth. But also ensure nothing is missed. Make sure you don't skip a step. Make sure that everyone's on board. Make sure that you get plenty of feedback on your plan before you start rolling it out. And as you say, make sure it's worthwhile. So yeah, these are well worth bearing in mind. And when you do your research and when we discuss and brainstorm some of the answers, yeah, note down things related to this because you can include them in your solution. So you have an idea. You have an idea for a project, usually where it starts. And before you start rolling it out, before you even start working on it, well, you have your idea, but you need to get some more meat on the bones. You need to start thinking about the idea in more detail. Think about the problem in more detail. So the first thing you do is a detailed analysis. This is usually the first step. What kind of things do you think might be involved as part of the analysis? Yeah, market research. How would you do that? Yes, good. Case studies. Talk to other people who've done something similar. Um, and well, how else could you do research? What other forms of research are there? Say again? Yeah, okay. Yeah, the internet and perhaps also sort of other documents, possibly going to the library, reading more about, I don't know, if you're trying to roll out something that you haven't rolled out before, then look at the manuals, look at web forums, possibly look at some of the financial details, just have a look at some of the documentary evidence that you have. Good. Um, what else? I mean, if you're going to roll out, if you're going to change the way people work, what else would you have to do? Yes? Yes? Okay. Yeah. So looking at the financial implications, um, you do what's called a feasibility study, which we will go into a lot more detail next week about feasibility. But this is where you'd look at whether it's financially feasible. We also talked about whether it's legally feasible or ethically feasible or even technically feasible. We want a 500 gigabyte or 500 gigabit per second connection to the internet. Not possible at the moment, technically. Might be in a few years' time, but right now that's not necessarily feasible. Um, what else? What's the fundamental thing that we're missing? If you're going to change the way people work, get their views. Yeah, talk to the people. You can talk to them. You can interview them. Maybe make them do questionnaires. There's limitations of doing questionnaires. Great for getting statistical feedback, but you can't sort of probe for more answers. So often, yeah, sit down and talk with them, possibly observe them working. Try and just watch people, watch how they do things. And before you start changing the process of people's workflow, and have a look at what their workflow is, so you understand the problem much better. That's the main point of the analysis, is to understand the problem much better. Try and understand the situation that you find yourself in much more detail. The next step is to then design your solution. So now you know everything about the problem, you start designing your solution. You start looking at your, you take all the bits from your analysis, and you now have a rough idea of what it is you're trying to achieve. So you can start designing your solution. That has a number of advantages, and there's a number of different ways of doing design that we will look at in one of the later assignments when we can look at some software and system design in more detail. But yeah, design is a crucial step before. What happens next? You build it. Yes. So you've analyzed your system, you know your problem in detail, you've designed your solution, and now you can start building it. So as part of the build process, you will also test it. Yes. These two will possibly, depending on the methodology. So these phases are common to all project management methodologies. Some of them approach this in slightly different ways, and some of them you basically loop around there for a while. You make a build, then you test it, and then you get some feedback, and then you make another build, and then you test that as well. You sort of constantly building and testing and tweaking until finally you tested it and it's reasonable. Well, yeah, that's kind of what testing is all about. You build something and you test it, but hopefully at this point it's still in a test environment. Once you've tested it and you're happy that it can do what you need it to do, what's the next step? You will have to evaluate it at some point, though. Yes. So we've now got a system that's tested. We've built the system. We've tested it. Now we can deliver it. Now we can, and in the delivery phase, depending on the system and the scenario, that will cover many different things, as well as actually going on site and setting it up. You will also do, what else might come under delivery? What else would you be expected to deliver, as well as the system, as well as, there you go, training. Yes, thank you. Training, and also support. Yes, because having given these people this new system, you need to make sure that you need to make sure that they know how it works, and then if they have any issues, at least they can come back to you. It's very difficult to iron out all the bugs in testing, because often you don't know what, until you've actually got it in a live environment, until you've actually got people using it, you won't necessarily know what all the bugs are. There might be some incompatibilities you didn't discover in your test environment. So you should still be prepared to probably do some testing in there as well, some maintenance and some training. And then we do the evaluation. So we go through all these phases, and as part of the evaluation, you might also get paid, and you might also sort of write the lessons learned. So in some cases, in some design system project management methodologies, system development methodologies, it will sort of end there. If it's a big contract, for example, then it will probably end there. But what might happen is that you then go around and you do another phase, depending on the project management methodology you're using, in which case you will then sort of continuously refine your system. Because even when your system has been delivered and you've evaluated it, chances are it's not going to be long. It'll be in a couple of years, maybe we can have a 500 gigabit per second connection, in which case we then need to analyze whether that's going to be financially viable, and then design our deployment, and we go around again. So, and that's maybe the difference between perhaps the waterfall model just does that, but ITIL and other models will sort of complete the loop, and you'll be in this constant cycle. We'll look at the methodologies in more detail later, possibly next week. So these are the phases. These are the main phases of any project management system. Any project management system that you're using needs to include these phases. To a greater or lesser extent, depending on the size of the project, depending on the environment, depending on the system it is that you're trying to deliver. But any system that you're trying to introduce should go through all these phases. So who's involved? Who's going to be doing this? So if we're just looking at phases, it's nice and abstract, but this is going to be carried out by humans. People are going to have to do this. So what sort of roles do you think? What sort of roles are necessary? A lead person, a project manager. Thank you. So what kind of things would a project manager be responsible for? Yeah, overseeing the project in general. This person will probably know most about the project, the state it's currently in, who's responsible for doing what. There's many tools that the project manager should be using, such as, and we'll go into plenty of detail about the actual tools the project manager would use later, but they'll be using Gantt charts, they'll be using a number of different diagrams, they'll be using probably Microsoft Project or OpenProj or some project management software to basically keep track of how much money you've spent so far, how close you are to your target, who's doing what, and other systems for breaking down your project, keeping track of who's doing what, and how close you are to completion. So is it just the project manager who's responsible for doing all this? You might. Yes, you will, and they will be covered. Who else is there? Yes, possibly. The project manager will probably have a project team. There'll be other people working with the project manager who will be responsible for doing administration, responsible for doing maybe some of the detail. As we were saying earlier, there might be consultants and various other people. But that's all very well and good. But who's the general workforce? But who else is going to be crucial? Who's going to be more crucial in developing your project, especially when you're doing your analysis and when you're doing your evaluation? The user, thank you, yes. The customer. When you're managing your projects, a project manager will have to spend a lot of time liaising with the customer to find out that, make sure they're satisfied, make sure that they captured the requirements correctly, make sure that show the project plans, perhaps not in that much detail, but there's, we'll talk about the documents required in a minute, but make sure that what gets delivered is actually what the customer asked for. Because it may well be that the customer says to the project manager, go and build me a system, and goes away and comes back, there you go, there's a system. That's not the system I wanted, go away and try again. There needs to be some solid communication going on there. And there are defined ways of doing that depending on the methodology you're using, which we'll look at in a minute. And as you said, there will be a supplier. I've called them supplier, but this can easily be, as well as contractors, it can be your administrator, it can be maybe other people who report to the project manager who are going to be helping the project manager complete and deliver the system that the project manager is in charge with sorting out. And often, Aaron, what was it you said a moment ago? You said a couple of things, didn't you? But the sort of, yes, often known as the project executive. Someone who's responsible for managing the project manager, essentially. Because the project manager may well be working on multiple projects. It might be that some customers are maybe, I don't know, haven't paid their bills or, yeah, depending on the environment, but usually there will also be a project executive that the project manager will report to. Project executive is often called the program manager. Often the hierarchy, you might see project manager jobs advertised and program manager jobs advertised. That's the sort of usual progression. The program manager or the project executive will manage a number of project managers. Yeah, and there'll be intercommunication in a number of different ways. Mostly, the project manager will be a conduit, but the customer might talk directly to the project executive. The suppliers might talk directly to the customers on time to time. Usually, the project manager will know what's going on. They'll know most about what's happening. Does that make sense? So, the project brief is where it all begins. This is what takes you from the idea. So you have an idea, and the next step is to create your project brief. Because by this point, I mean, you could start creating Gantt charts and you could start going off into detailed design, but that's probably not wise at this stage. That might even be a waste of time because it might be that your project isn't even financially viable. So the project brief will state, the emphasis is on the word brief, but it will state what the project is all about, why it's sensible to do it, maybe where it's going to be implemented, some idea of the time frame, who's likely to be involved in working the project. Often, and it's usually a good idea to put in an idea of scope, to limit it somehow, because it is quite possible that someone can ask you to, I don't know, if the project is replace the carpet, they might also say, well, you have to replace the tables and the chairs and everything else. If you're not careful, the project scope can creep a great deal and you end up replacing more than you intended to, or some stuff that wasn't in the original idea. Might be that two people agree on roughly what it is they're trying to be doing, but one person thinks that it includes more than it actually does. So scope is a great word to include. And also some rough idea of cost. And then based on the project brief, you might, this is even before you get into the analysis, but this is something that you will basically table with the customer, the project executive will look at it, and based on the project brief, you may or may not go to the next stage. And the next stage would then be a full project proposal, which we will look at in more detail next week.